The loss of Sabu, who passed away on May the 11th at the age of 60, is, I think, perhaps one of those ones where people may not have been quite sure just what we had, how privileged we were to be able to watch someone like Sabu until he was gone. While in his lifetime it was certainly clear that he had a considerable impact on wrestling, sadly it does look like it's taken his passing for a lot of us to think back and just realise how much we wouldn't have if it wasn't for the work of Sabu. How his work changed things completely, from the Indies to ECW, from Japan to WWE, everywhere. Someone like him in many ways is hard to find. There's not many out there who wrestled like Sabu. To be more accurate about it, there's not many out there who would dare to wrestle like Sabu. In this package you have the old school, unbreakable, near mute presence of the legendary uncontrollable monsters of the past, whether they be Abdullah the Butcher, Tiger Jeet Singh, or of course his own uncle. You combine this with outrageous agility, the ability to do things in the ring that were simply unheard of back in his prime days, and a complete devil-may-care attitude, not just to perform these high-risk feats, but to do so in such dramatic ways, to forever be teetering on the tightrope. For one of these landings to be messy, sketchy and certainly brutal wasn't an imperfection in Sabu's style, it was by design, like some kind of legendary silent comedian almost. The Thief of Baghdad, covered in blood barbed wire, his wounds superglued shut. When you bring all this together, you have someone who was a true runoff, someone for whom unique is not a meaningless word. As Taz said in his emotional tribute to the man on the May 14th AEW Dynamite, Sabu was aura long before the word aura was cool. I figure that the best way to pay a tribute to this legend then is to look at how he got there and how he changed things. Not necessarily just to go all the way through a bunch of matches, but to highlight several bouts that were the making of Sabu from his earlier years. We're not even really touching his most famous work in ECW here. Instead we find ourselves in the world of early 90s American Indies and the NWA, and of course FMW, which was the first place perhaps where a young man named Terry Brunk, originally dubbed Sabu the Elephant Boy, would really become Sabu. Some of the footage may be a bit shaky, the sort that was originally captured by a camcorder decades ago, copied many times over, but back in the early 90s this was gold dust. The almighty wrestling historian Phil Schneider, in his tribute for The Ringer spotlighting several Sabu classics, including ones we're covering here, makes a metaphor for Sabu's impact that I can't possibly improve on, but will gamely paraphrase. That his matches in the early 90s, whether seen live or on a tape, were like the Sex Pistols' Manchester show in 1976. Even if there were only 75 or so people in attendance, it changed those 75 people's lives, and they would spread the gospel of this death-defying maniac. And so, let us begin. For our first couple of matches, we go back to a time before Sabu was entirely all the way Sabu. The man spent quite a long time training and honing his craft, and he did this under the watchful eye of his aforementioned uncle, Ed Farhat, the original Sheik. From 1985 onwards, Sabu spent his time learning all the ropes under the Sheik, who gave him his original Sabu the Elephant Boy moniker, as well as another early moniker, Terry SR, with the SR standing for Sheik's Revenge. He'd basically be doing everything from helping build and take down the rings, refereeing, and of course learning the ropes from his uncle at his wrestling school, based in Williamston, Michigan on the Sheik's estate and farm, eventually helping with the training. And of course he would get the gimmick too, the pants, the hair, the pointing at the sky. Another rare thing about Sabu is that he was, for the most part, a one gimmick man. While he would have his young lion blue trunks get-up years, just like anyone else, and there is video evidence of that from Liam Ivere's PPW in Hawaii circa 1986, it wasn't long before he was the Sheik's nephew, powered by the familial bond of violence, and that's what Sabu would be right till the very end. The Sheik didn't exactly go about teaching Sabu how to be hardcore, mind you. He wasn't out there giving fireball throwing lessons. Being hardcore was something he had to discover on his own, while the Sheik taught him the fundamentals, trying to build him into more of a grounded, technical wrestler. The experimentations and building of the style that Sabu would eventually make his own actually came through working with another person who was being trained by the Sheik, a young Battle Creek native named Rob Zakowski, who is, of course, better known as Rob Van Dam. RVD began training under the Sheik in 1988, and he would pretty quickly hit it off with Sabu. They'd be trying out the high-risk spots they'd fought up essentially under Sabu's uncle's nose in the practice ring, waiting until he'd gone in before going all out, and then going back to normal when he came back to watch. With all this in mind, and considering just how Sabu and Rob Van Dam would go on to define each other's careers, it is appropriate that some of the earliest matches we can see for both these legends pits them against each other, albeit in wildly different guises. The first proper Sabu Fin that's available to us here is a couple of matches from 1991, pitting Sabu against Rob Zakowski, for RVD was still wrestling under a moniker close to his real name. 1990 was RVD's debut year, and while there's not much record on the likes of cage match for Sabu matches before 1990, 1986 was very likely his rookie year. So yes, you could say that Sabu was the senpai in this partnership, if you want to get all pro-res dojo about it. The first televised meeting between Sabu and RVD happened in Memphis for the USWA on 6th July 1991 in a rather short bout, but there's a much more extended meeting between them from 27th September 1991 in the NEWF, the New England Wrestling Federation. First off, while Sabu is working pretty close to the gimmick he'd always have, RVD is certainly different. His gimmick is that he's a kickboxer billed from Warsaw, Poland, he's got blue gear and a glorious blonde mullet. No matter, you can quickly see that trademark flexibility as soon as he gets down in the splits to duck a clothesline, and we get plenty of nice kicks. We see some wild fins in this match, especially for 1991. Sabu doing a big rope walk from post to post, RVD responding with his own rope walk that ends with a drop kick, RVD missing a 450 splash, a whole lot of rapid fire ring work. There is so much going on here that, at the time, you just didn't see in American wrestling, right here in this high school gym. The 450 splash, indeed, is one of the first ones that's successfully executed on American soil, alongside Too Cold Scorpio's Scorpio Splash. Scott Steiner did do it previously in 1987, but he didn't like how he landed, and he never did it again. We get a double count-out ending here following a suplex to the outside, but still, there is a lot of cool stuff here between two young guns, and it's a lot of fun indeed. Now, while RVD was still a few years away from finding the gimmick and style that would make his legend, Sabu was right on the cusp of finding success, and that would first happen for him in Japan. As successful as the original Sheik was in America, a big chunk of his legend happened in Japan, back in the 70s. He first wrestled for JWA, right at that company's end, before largely working in All Japan as part of a much feared and highly decorated tag team with Abdullah the Butcher. He finished up with All Japan in 1981, but a decade later, he got a call from Atsushi Onita, who wanted to bring him over to FMW. Sheik was 65 years old at this point, and while he certainly wouldn't turn down the payday, he knew he could hardly do it alone, and so he made a condition that he would do the tour so long as he could work with his nephew, to which FMW agreed. And so that's how we get that most violent of familial tag teams. Sabu and the Sheik are in frontier martial arts, ready to run rampant. And as much as the Sheik had tried to impart the wonders of a more conservative and grounded mat style onto his nephew, it was apparently on the plane ride over to Japan where he told Sabu that he should, instead, wrestle how he felt he should, recognising that the FMW crowd would respond better to faster, more aerial action. In Sabu's words, Sheik told him to wrestle like he wasn't watching, because of course, he had been watching whenever Sabu and RVD were experimenting and doing all that wild stuff in that practice ring on his farm, even if Sabu didn't know it. Sabu and the Sheik debuted as a team in FMW's World's Strongest Tag Team tournament at the end of 1991. Their first match ever was against the team of Horace Boulder, better known as Horace Hogan, and Mark Starr, which I find kind of amusing seeing as it is essentially Sabu against Horace in a battle of famous wrestling nephews, and it's one that Sabu wins after a springboard Arabian press. There's also fan cam footage of a match with Sabu and the Sheik against shooter Katsutoshi Niyama and a young Eiji Azaki, who would later become Hayabusa. That's certainly very cool to see. Now, a lot of these matches don't usually run long. Sheik largely gets into it on the outside and subjects some poor soul to dinner utensil based punishment, while Sabu and the other wrestler do the work in the ring. Usually the bouts are a couple of minutes long at best, although they're certainly not short on action, and as you can imagine, that action goes well into the post-match. The timekeeper's bell here is really just a guideline, one that is never followed. You know that there'll be much more brawling, Sheik going completely mad and probably making himself bleed, the pair prowling through the crowd looking for someone else to eviscerate as the fans desperately try to get away, Anita or some others coming in to get them out and continue the carnage, and perhaps the odd fireball here and there. A Sheik match just isn't complete if some poor sod doesn't get an impromptu singeing, especially when he's 65 and can't exactly take much in the way of bumps. Simply looking at Cage Match and seeing that these matches officially go about 50 seconds or so doesn't even begin to tell the story of the chaos that would unfurl, some of which has happily been captured on ultra grainy videotape, plucked from the many Sabu videos that fans compiled back in the day. As far as moments go, obviously we can't not mention the most famous Sabu and Sheik tag match. You know, the one where Lei, Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto almost burned to death. The May 6, 1992 Ring of Fire deathmatch may only go for 4 minutes, but it sure is a spectacle. Barbed wire ropes wrapped in towels drenched in kerosene. Sabu went through the details of this one a couple of times with both Jim Cornette and Chris Candido. It sure is an incredible image, the wrestlers surrounded by that blazing fire as Night on Bald Mountain, Sheik and Sabu's theme, plays out, but as soon as the bell rings and those flames were lit, it became pretty clear to the quartet that they were in a lot of trouble. The oxygen was sucked right out of the ring, the FMW logo in the middle started to melt and stick to the wrestlers, and Onita quickly said to the Sheik that things were bad, which apparently surprised Sheik as he didn't know Onita could speak English. Sabu and Goto got out of the ring pretty sharpish, but Onita and Sheik stayed in a bit longer, with Sheik even taking a bump just so that he could crawl out of there. And if the Sheik's taken a bump, then you know that things have hit a major snafu. Seriously, if they'd stayed in there even a minute or so longer, things could have been a lot worse. One other amusing detail is Sheik actually getting pissed off at Sabu trying to douse him in water when he got out of there because, well, despite all this fire, and despite suffering third-degree burns on his back, Sheik still wanted to do the fireball on Anita, and he didn't want to get his hands wet. Despite all the burns, Sheik never once let anyone know that he was in pain because, well, that's the Sheik. We're talking about a guy who kept kayfabe at home with his frickin' family here, and he's not about to stop that just because his skin got melted off. We should also be happy that FMW liked to do this sort of match outside, as opposed to in any kind of arena, really. The Ring of Fire match happened in a parking lot in Sander, meaning that once the wrestlers got out of there, the whole thing could just happily burn without causing any more harm. And burn it did, for many hours. Hopefully the crew got some nice toasted marshmallows out of the deal. The Ring of Fire is definitely the most famous Sabu Sheik FMW match, but it is not the best one. For that, we're actually going to 1993 for one hell of a street fight, a true battle of hardcore legends on August 22nd. It's the Sheik and Sabu versus Tarzan Goto and Terry Funk. Hell yeah. A 67-year-old Sheik is perhaps the only man who can out-crazy a 49-year-old Terry Funk, and they both go the whole hog in this spectacle, mercilessly making each other bleed on the outside from the get-go, all while burly Tarzan Goto and Sabu duke it out in the ring. The younger pair happily chuck a table at each other and perform various awesome spots with it. Naturally, that table's not going to break for anybody, thus cementing Sabu's lengthy rivalry with Wood of Japanese origin, especially when the damn thing rolls over on a missed moonsault, threatening to do Sabu some major damage. Now, as an aside, we really do need to talk a bit about Sabu and tables. While Sabu wasn't the first wrestler to go for a table or anything like that, he was absolutely the main guy who perfected the table spot and popularised it, the genius of it being something that looked absolutely devastating and popped the crowd massively, yet was actually considerably more preferable to taking a flat back bump on a concrete floor. Wooden planks slow momentum and break falls, after all. I made a crack about Chekhov's table, a fairly common wrestling term based on said literary device, in my previous vid about wild bumps, and yeah, that is basically a Sabu thing, to set that table up, for it to be there for a while, to be teased, almost to be forgotten about until suddenly, BAM! The big impact happens. The role of the table in wrestling is, in short, the handy and very easily breakable house that Sabu built. Unless they're Japanese, of course. And after Sabu did it, well, everybody else was doing it. Anyway, back to this match right here. When Sheik does get to the ring, he's happy to go to business with a fork, no doubt scrawling something rude on poor Goto's forehead with it. The crucial moment comes when Sheik readies the dreaded fireball while Sabu's got hold of Funk. The Funker moves, and while he does get a bit of the flame, Sabu gets the worst of it. With Goto and Sheik fighting on the outside, Funk does the crucial moves with a chair, eventually knocking Sabu out with a pile driver onto it. Although of course that doesn't mean the action's over. They still tear the crowd asunder well after the bell, with so many awesome visuals. That freaking close-up of Sheik picking his nose with the damn fork, Funk screaming, "Sheik!" and throwing chairs around, finally getting together so they can choke each other out. I mean, this whole thing goes 10 minutes, and there's more action here than you'll find on some 4-hour supercards. While everyone plays their part fantastically here, I do feel that the Sheik deserves special mention, as it is probably the last must-see match of Sheik's career. No mean feat considering that Sheik's career started in 1950, and not many wrestlers have one of their best matches at the age of frickin' 67. A tremendous skirmish, and an absolute must-watch if you enjoy hardcore wrestling. It is worth noting too that Sabu had a big influence on Terry Funk late in his career. Those words are from right out of the great Texan's mouth. Usually someone who's been wrestling for nearly 30 years at this point isn't going to take influence from anybody, but that most definitely wasn't the case here. And obviously you should go ahead and look at their ECW 1997 barbed wire match to see more of that for yourself. There are, of course, so many other highlights from Sabu's time in FMW, not to mention various other wild stories and occurrences, such as the time when, in the heat of battle against Gladiator Mike Awesome, the pair started going wild in the Yakuza section of the crowd that was usually off limits, causing much consternation amongst the fraternal organisation members in attendance, and almost getting the pair in, well, a major spot of bother, put mildly. There's matches against the almighty likes of Hayabusa and Mr. Ganosuke, his first ever barbed wire match where he teamed with Horace and faced off with Sambo Asako and Onita. He even had a hybrid match with frickin' Leon Spinks, one that is sadly not around on video, but there is an awesome pic of Spinks knocking Sabu out right in the middle of him pointing to the sky. The best thing to do here is to find an old compilation, the sort of thing that would be traded around back in the day. There is a good example on YouTube that I'll link to. Stick that on, sit back, and just enjoy the chaos. And of course, it was this wild work in FMW that caught the attention of one Paul Heyman, who wanted to bring him in for what was then still Eastern Championship Wrestling, and the two agreed on something not long after Heyman got the book and full creative control in September of 1993. This was a time when Sabu was pretty highly in demand with everybody. He had tryout matches in WWF around this time, including a bout with Owen Hart that was by all accounts incredible and is highly sought after indeed, but no footage of it has ever been released. He was offered a WWF contract thanks to these tryouts, but ultimately turned it down because he wanted to keep working with FMW. Sabu was pushed lightning quick in ECW. He won the World Championship from Shane Douglas in his second show, and he would soon be holding the TV title as well. The ECW crowd got their first taste of him on October 1st, 1993, however, where he would face the Tasmaniac, or Taz for short. Sabu's brought out to the ring like he's Hannibal Lecter, a barely controllable creature strapped to a gurney with a mask covering his mouth. What with this, as well as Taz's hair and face paint, it is a bit of a surreal match looks-wise, but you could recognise that these two are wrestling even if they were covered in single-colour bodysuits from the SmackDown games, and the action here is just freaking remarkable. The chairs thrown asunder, brawling through the crowd, tables smashed into oblivion, absolutely wild dives to the outside, and the cherry on top, Sabu getting even wilder once the bout's over, repeatedly moonsaulting onto a table with nobody on it. These two just flat out go to war with each other. It's beautiful stuff, and while this was a big moment for Sabu, it is a big moment for Taz as well. Sabu was the one getting the push after all, and Tasmaniac was initially only brought in here to simply put him over. This is also his first appearance in ECW, and the pair had such a freaking good match, one that perfectly exemplifies what ECW were now trying to do, that Taz also becomes a major part of the promotion, getting a push of his own. As Taz said in his own emotional tribute to Sabu, he wouldn't have had the career that he had if it wasn't for him, as Sabu didn't really have to get him over as much as he did in this bout. Lovely stuff. This match is a cracker, and there is another awesome bout between them that happened on November 12th that is also well worth watching, one where Sabu's heavyweight title was on the line. As with a lot of these opponents, what we are seeing here is the start of a majorly epic rivalry that would define both people's careers. There is one more match that I want to highlight here. It's another from before the ECW days, and it is perhaps the absolute must-see match from this whole video. There's lots of good stuff from Sabu at this time to look at that isn't from ECW and doesn't always get mentioned. Indeed, we're actually going a few months back for this next contest. We're still in the States, but this is before Sabu started up in ECW. On April 17th, 1993, Sabu took on the Lightning Kid, Sean Waltman, in an absolutely fantastic contest on an NWA card in Minneapolis, the first one there for years. This is only a couple of weeks before Kid's first televised match in WWF, and the pair really take to the skies on this one. Tremendous dives all over the shop, a rather nasty bit of claret from Kid thanks to the interference of one Oliver Humperdinck, and just a great high-wire act of a match in general. 14 minutes of absolute must-see action before the whole thing descends into chaos and gets thrown out. Sabu and Kid never got a whole lot of chances to work each other in their prime years, which is a shame considering just how much of a cracker this bout is. The action in this match from over 30 years ago wouldn't feel out of place at all on any card today, and this is key to understanding Sabu's influence. The high work rate, highly aerial, fast-paced wrestling style, mixing those big moves with weapons, with story, with blood and guts, is the best style going today, the one that so many wrestlers aspire to, and that is pretty much everywhere. Indies, AEW, WWE, the lot. And before Sabu, basically nobody was doing it in America. It's not just that there were people directly influenced by Sabu, doing it in the immediate years after that. This is what people are still doing now. And even then, there really aren't that many people who can do it in the way that Sabu did it. One particularly great artifact from this time that is available to hear is Wade Keller and others talking about the match on Wade's Pro Wrestling Focus radio show, recorded basically right after the event. And they're just amazed, saying it's the best bout that they've seen in years in America, certainly light years ahead of what they'd seen the WWF offer up mere weeks earlier with WrestleMania 9, and just talking about this match, and particularly Sabu, with such shock and glee. They hadn't seen anything like this before. What a great thing to have, and it shows the intrigue that the man built up at the time. The moment you heard about Sabu on a show, the moment you read about him in a magazine like Pro Wrestling Illustrated or whatever, chances are good you wanted to see him more than frickin' anyone else, whether you read about a match like this or something like the Ring of Fire match in FMW, it doesn't matter. Immediately, he is someone you have to watch. You have to find him. And where might you go to find details of that? Well, you might go to The Observer in the end. On the Wrestling Observer side, Meltzer talks of the match stealing the show, and how clearly the 750-strong audience hadn't seen Sabu and hadn't seen these sorts of moves before, and they were utterly captivated. Now, Meltzer was, of course, another big voice when it came to spreading the good word of Sabu, even if it came with the odd bit of concern over the extremities of his style. When you look at old observers from 1993 or so, Big Dave talks of someone in a whole other league even from Cactus Jack, another person who Sabu had a seminal feud with in the mid-90s, when it comes to taking risks in the ring, chasing fans all over the building and giving the children nightmares. Someone who fans should enjoy while they can, as clearly he's not going to be able to keep it up for too long because Lord knows what condition they'll be in later on in life. Every Observer issue was filled with reports on Sabu's latest exploits, the latest great match that he'd had, where he was going to be and who he was going to face next. And shockingly enough, the Reader's Pages section at the end of every newsletter is filled with people who are either looking for tapes of Sabu or are willing to trade or sell tapes of Sabu. The Observer side represents the audience who were most familiar with Sabu's work and had followed him the longest. The smarks, the ones who'd read all the pamphlets and watched the tapes. And to see just how much they loved him and what they thought his impact on wrestling at the time was, well, just look at the 1994 Observer Awards. Observer readers gave the big prize, the Lou Fez Award for Wrestler of the Year, to Toshiaki Kawada. When you look at the matches he had that year, June 3rd, 94, finally winning the Carnival and the Triple Crown and so on, that's pretty deserved. And who's second on that list? Sabu. And not all that far behind either. Kawada beat him by 960 points to 923, and the two were hundreds of points ahead of anyone else in the voting. Sabu was over 300 points ahead of the third placed Ric Flair, and even in the most outstanding wrestler standings, the award purely based on match quality, he's second there as well, with 1,009 points, beaten only by Kenta Kobashi, and a few points ahead of, that one Canadian dude I can't quite remember the name of right now. And let's not forget that all of this is, of course, from the days before most everyone had the internet to play around with. It's not as if Sabu's matches are easily available for everyone to see. Now, to some people nowadays who may have seen a lot of videos of Sabu ducking out of springboards and failing to break Japanese tables, no shade to anyone at all here of course, I am sure that sounds utterly ridiculous. But then that is the job of a video like this, to show just why it wasn't ridiculous at all, and how Sabu was, quite literally, changing wrestling. Back in the early mid-90s, Sabu was, to put it bluntly, the future. Truly, nobody else was offering up anything like he was, and really, through the majority of his career, that was usually the case. People may talk about the various botches and what have you, but if you watch Sabu enough, you understand that was utterly by design, that these moves should not always look picture perfect, that it should be a constant struggle, all part of the cosmic ballet of pro wrestling. There is plenty enough evidence of just how damn good he was through all the people he worked with over the years. No one has a bad word to say. He worked so damn well with everyone, whether it's Cactus Jack and Terry Funk, Rob Van Dam and Hayabusa, Tarzan the Sandman, Rey Mysterio, Al Snow, Too Cold Scorpio, and John Cena. His reputation in the ring speaks for itself as being utterly impeccable. For all the wild things he did, he never hurt anyone. Well, aside from himself. There are so many great wrestlers where you wonder just what wrestling would look like if they had never existed. But with Sabu, I almost don't want to think about that. It's hard to overestimate just how different and how much worse things would be if he'd never been around. The impact that he had on wrestling, the amount of people he inspired, the fans he left in wonder, filled not just with the love of pro wrestling, but with a whole new understanding of the possibilities of pro wrestling and just what it could do. It's incalculable. Just look at the big companies in 1993 and 1994, and then look at him. What can you say? I can't think of too many better conduits for the love of pro wrestling than Sabu. He certainly did it for me when I watched him for the first time, in ECW back in 1997 or so. He opened people's minds, and he will be missed terribly. Bye for now.